Bhakti, and then also I do leadership coaching work. So for all of you, and I love studying psychology and leadership and how that applies to these spiritual principles, timeless spiritual principles as well. So I'm really happy to be with all of you here today, and I'm hoping for we can pull the verse up, but I'm also hoping for some discussion. For those of you who have seen me on here, I see some familiar faces. Uh, I like to have some positive discussion and engaging discussion and make it practical and relevant. So that we're not just looking at these texts as just a to-do list or just to get our sadhana in, but actually something that's nourishing to our mind, but to our soul, our spiritual life. So both. Okay. Can we pull up the text, Prabhu? Maybe I'm not seeing it.
I'm pulling it. It's weird. It says share content. Okay, I see it now. I see it. Okay. All right. Share.
Perfect. Okay. So you can go. We can go to the translation, but we'll just go through it. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10th canto, first chapter, 44th verse. Haribol, everyone. So this is in the context of Vasudeva. It's the pastime of Kamsa, and Shukadeva Goswami is narrating this pastime, and this is really in the context of Vasudeva is giving different arguments to Kamsa. So for those of you who've been joining, are quite probably familiar with this as we're going in chronological order. He's giving arguments to him because Kamsa is quite enraged and fearful that from the prophecy that Vasudeva and Devaki's children will be killing him. And so he wants to kill the children before they can harm him. And especially particularly the eighth child of Devaki. And so Vasudeva is giving arguments to Kamsa that you don't have to worry about these children killing you, and giving various types of arguments to him. So we'll look at one of them in this case. The translation: therefore, since envious and impious activities cause a body in which one suffers in the next life, why should one act impiously? Considering one's welfare, one should not envy anyone, for an envious person must always fear harm from his enemies either in this life or in the next. And then we'll read the purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Instead of being inimical toward other living entities, one should act piously by engaging in the service of the Supreme Person. The Supreme Lord, thus avoiding a fearful situation both in this life and in the next. In this regard, the following moral instruction by the great politician Chanakya Pandit is very meaningful. One should give up the company of devils, demons, and non-devotees, and one should always associate with devotees and saintly persons. One should always act piously, thinking that this life is temporary, and one should not be attached to temporary happiness and distress. The Krishna conscious movement is teaching all of human society this principle of becoming Krishna conscious and thus solving the problems of life forever. Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti so Arjuna. It's from the Gita, reference to the Gita. Okay, so thank you for that. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. These are just some opening invocation prayers before we go into the class. Om Agyanti Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshtarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinda Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, thank you all for being here and for being attentive audience. Nice to see everyone here. Andrea, it's nice to see you as well. I see your note in the chat as well. So going to this verse, like, wanted to make a couple points and have some good discussion as well, questions, comments at the end, and maybe even a little bit of engagement during it. Can you maybe use the chat if we like to get some engagement going? So, like mentioned, Vasudeva is giving different arguments to Kamsa, and in this case, he's giving an argument of sharing that if you kill these children and act in an envious way, you'll be setting up a situation for yourself that's fearful in the next life. And as I was reading that, I was thinking of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He talks about 4 different motivations in Chaitanya Shikshamrita. He talks about 4 different motivations. He talks about fear, desire, duty, and love. There's four different types. And in this verse, it's sort of speaking to this fear and desire piece, which is a fair argument. Because Vasudeva, his life is being threatened. His wife's life is being threatened, who's Kamsa's sister practically, younger cousin sister. And so it's a very abominable situation. It's a very, very actually degraded, messed up situation when we really think about it, because it's family trying to kill family, actually. And so he's giving different arguments, and in this case, he's sharing, and I'll speak on these 4 motivations very briefly, but he's sharing that you have something to lose by this behavior. And this is important to note, because when we're in a fearful mindset, when we have this motivation of fear, fear is a motivation of knowing that if we do X, then Y will happen. If we touch the fire, our hand will get burned. So we fearfully don't do that, and it keeps us in proper behavior. And so fear is necessary sometimes. But it's not the highest level of motivation. So he's sharing this one argument here. Then we have desire. So what do we stand to gain? This is the second level of motivation. So this is sometimes in the world we have to do things because we desire certain things, whether it might be status or capital or resources, etc. So that's there as well. So what do we stand to gain? So in this case, he stands to gain maybe some pious credit from this situation if he is doing the right thing. So that's also a good desire, but it's also still not the highest. Then we have duty. This is where we do things because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And this is starting to come to the level of a Vaishnava. The first 2 levels are just like in sort of a very instinctual feeling of life, fight or flight and threat and reward, really, really there. But this is where we come to that human platform, the Vaishnava platform, actually, and not even fully there, but where we want to do things because they're the right thing, not because we have to necessarily do them, but we feel like they're the right thing to do. In this case, Kamsa's life is being threatened, but he doesn't have to kill the children, etc. So the right thing to do is to protect his family and to figure out maybe some other alternative arrangement. And then the last motivation Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions is love. And this is when we're doing things not because even it's the right thing to do, but because there's a sense of love and connection toward every living being that comes from our heart. When we're seeing everyone with equal vision and seeing everyone part and parcel of Krishna, actually. And that we have to really cultivate that. That's not something that sometimes we think that our ideal in bhakti is pure love, and that it can come very easily, but it's actually a high stage, and it needs to be cultivated gradually, as Srila Prabhupada says, over our lifetime and sometimes lifetimes, to actually build this sense of deep love and compassion for everyone. So these are the 4 motivations Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about, and you can reflect in your life where even some of these motivations, you're bringing them in different places of your life, whether it's work, with your colleagues, with your family, and loved ones, etc. And in this verse, he's speaking more to this fear aspect, which is very fair. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this, and even talk a little bit about karma in this case, because I'll be going in a couple different places in this class, and then we'll bring it all together, if you will. I like doing that sometimes. But he's speaking about this. Also, when I was reading it, I was seeing that he was speaking about this principle of karma, and that every action has a reaction. Basically, the principle of physics, every action has equal and opposite reaction. And one thing that's interesting about this that I wanted to mention is that sometimes we think, and the verse talks about how a fearful situation in this life by acting enviously and the next, right, and etc. Sometimes we think that these things are destiny, or our karma is our destiny. And that's certainly there. And sometimes we think that there's forces outside of our control when we are behaving in certain ways. But actually, one thing I wanted to share in this was I was looking into Kamsa and his background. He's actually, in his former life, he's actually a demon. And he was the son of Hiranyakashipu. And his name was Kalanimi. He's a demon. And so we can see that that Kamsa's chosen these behaviors for some time. It's not like he's just coming out of the blue and having this behavior. And the point that I wanted to make there is that we actually have so much more control over our behavior than we think. Because when we look at even science and you look at the principle of karma and you look at neuroscience even, there's this idea that our brains are they call them neuroplastic. So when we do something, sometimes back in the day, there was this idea that you had certain fixed characteristics based off your genes, and you would act in that way. Whatever your temperament was, whatever your personality was, your strengths and your weaknesses. But what the latest science is finding is that we are actually always evolving and adapting. Even at old age, where our brain is constantly evolving and adapting. But the more we choose certain behaviors and patterns, the more those behavior and patterns become second nature to us. And there's a psychologist named Viktor Frankl. For many, I don't know if you're familiar, some of you might be familiar with him, but he's written this nice book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he was actually a survivor of the Holocaust on one of the camps. So he's lived in a very dreadful situation for many years. He's seen so much death, and seen human beings acting in ways Kamsa did, right, in that way. And he says that there's a stimulus and there's a response. So when we see something, when we're confronted with something, there's a certain response that comes from us. But in between that, so for example, let's say we're getting criticized by someone. Now, when we get criticized, we can react to it in many different ways. But most often, our response is our habituated response that we've been practicing, maybe from childhood, maybe from our social circle, from our family, friends, etc., that we've learned some behaviors, or maybe they're more conscious behaviors, and we respond immediately. And we think that, oh, well, this is just who I am, right? But actually, he says that in between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, we can really create our freedom. That's where our freedom really lies, in between stimulus and response. And so we have to actually work on creating that space. And we can see Kamsa has no space between that, because he's really chosen certain behavior. So we can say, okay, it's karma. There's some sort of karma that he's going to die and it's destiny. We can also see that he's also chosen his fate on one level as well, because he hasn't really looked at it. It's unconscious, practically speaking. So I wanted to make this point because when we do something, that neural pathway gets stronger and becomes second nature to us. And so it really makes us think about, what are we actually practicing? What are we taking in every day? What's the content of our mind? What are we exposing ourselves to? And that's really, really key here. And I want to make that point around karma. And there's a really nice example here also in the Mahabharata of Duryodhana. And when I would I grew up reading the Mahabharata, it would infuriate me as a kid because, Duryodhana he would act in so many different ways. And when the elders like Vidura and Bhishma and even Dhritarashtra would try to help him, he would say this, and it would really bother me sometimes. He would say, well, this is just who I am. The person that I am is just who I am. And sometimes we might say, well, we're not Duryodhana, but sometimes we can also have that mindset. Someone gives us feedback on something, or tells us something that we don't like, and something that we need to work on, or something that we did that had hurt someone that we loved, perhaps. Sometimes we can get very defensive, right, if we're very honest. And we can kind of go into this mindset of, well, this is just who I am. This is just what I do. This is who I am. I'm not going to necessarily change. And what we're saying in that moment is that we don't want to actually make the effort to change, the effort to be honest, and have the courage to be honest and actually look at what we need to really, really work on. But the introspective spiritualist, which I believe we're all trying to be, it will really try their best, even if it's uncomfortable, and it can be very uncomfortable, to look at the truth of the message that they're getting and look to create space between stimulus and response. Because in that space, our freedom, our growth lies in there, our freedom lies in that space. And just to end that point, because the real point here is that our fate lies in our hands, actually. Sometimes we think, and we have this beautiful concept of Maya, for sure, and that's very true. We talk about sometimes that Maya is illusion, and we need to be very mindful of that. Just like when I think about Christianity, they speak about the devil and being mindful of that. But I'd like to think about it, actually, I think the essence, the way I've understood it, is that in the Vedic tradition, it's actually on us. We don't have to worry so much about other beings or whatnot. If we're doing the right thing, we'll be supported. We actually need to work on ourselves, and we have control over what we can do, our attitude, our effort, and what we're actually absorbing each day. And then let destiny take us where it does. But actually putting the ball in our court. So those are some thoughts on Kamsa, his situation, look at stimulus response, karma. And there's a really nice commentary by Srila Madhvacharya on the Mahabharata Tatparya Nirayana. And he mentions this, I really like this point. He mentions that there's a reason in the Mahabharata, the Kaurava army is bigger than the Pandava army. Symbolically, there's a reason. And because if you look at it, actually the Kaurava army is superior from a tactical perspective. And they don't have Krishna, obviously we know this, but when you look at it from just a purely tactical perspective, they are bigger. And he mentions that this is because the symbolism of this is that our mind tends to incite more harmful action than positive action. And this is the Kaurava army, Pandava can represent the mind, actually. And so it tends to do that. And so we need to be really mindful of that. And even in psychology, there you can see something, I spoke about this in class a couple months ago, that there's something called the negativity bias that we have, where our brain is constantly looking for threats in the environment and it helps keep us alive, versus actually looking for the positives and the things that are good. And this affects our life, our quality of life, our relationships, and everything that we do, right? And so particularly when the mind is conditioned, when we haven't trained it, we're going to go toward that harmful action unless we really train the mind, really. And so that's really, really, it's an important point there, that we tend to have that. And even different relationship experts mention that, for example, it's so important, we tend to amplify the negative. For example, think about you've gone to a program, let's say, maybe a social event, or maybe even a devotee gathering. And I think we've all had this experience, and can all say this, and tell me if you haven't. But you go to the event, let's maybe it's Janmashtami, maybe it's Nityananda Tiradashi, it was yesterday. And you go to the event and you see many devotees, or maybe see some friends if you're at a social event, wherever the case might be. And 10 people say positive things to you. They say, oh, it's so nice to see you. They're appreciating qualities, they're appreciating your service, they're appreciating seeing you. It happens that one person says something, maybe they make an insensitive comment, a sly remark, or they give you some feedback or something like that, or maybe they don't even look at you and you expect them to look at you and to acknowledge you, and they don't come over and say hi. Or you see them, you say, oh, their energy is a little off. And I think we all walk away, and what do we really focus on? Not the 10 positives that we had. When we go home, often the mind goes toward that one negative. Oh, what was that person thinking? Why were they upset at me? How dare they? What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? Should I reach out to them? We start to think in that way. And so there's that negativity bias. And that may or may not be true. Maybe that person is thinking negatively. Maybe it was very unintentional, and we're looking into it, but that is definitely there. And so we need to be really mindful of this. And even certain relationships experts mention that in a relationship, you need to have 5-to-1 positive to negative interactions to balance out. Meaning that if you have too many negative, it can override the situation. So you have to have every 5 positives to 1 negative, actually. This is John Gottman. He mentions this. He's a expert in relationship, and so you can see the difference. How much positive is needed to outweigh the negative, actually. So those are some thoughts, and going back to Kamsa, we can see that he has obviously chosen some bad habits, and he has very little space between stimulus and response between him. And this is he's an example of what we don't want to be, actually. And so we can learn a lot from that as well. There's examples in Shastra of qualities we want to have, many examples, but there's qualities also of folks that we don't want to be, even though it's part of the Leela of the Lord and the pastimes of the Lord. We can still learn from that. And in terms of Kamsa, I wanted to mention many of the demons, they represent different anarthas, and particularly Kamsa he's a personification of material attachment and also envy. You can see that, very envious of Krishna. But he's really the personification of being materially attached. What do we mean by material attachment? Well, I don't necessarily mean, when I was examining and looking at Kamsa, I don't necessarily mean attachment to material objects like a car or a big house, whatnot. Okay, that's there. You can also use that in service. But more than that, it's very subtle, is attachment to control, to power, to wanting to play God. Right? You see this even with Kamsa. He overthrows his father, Ugrasena, to become the king, actually. Right? He actually overthrows his own father. And you can see this sense of aggression toward his family is very much part of his behavior from even before he is attacking Krishna and targeting Krishna with sending all these demons to Gokula. And so this sense, when we talk about material attachment, we're really talking about this addiction to arrogance and power and to control others, very much so. And really on the bodily plane. We're thinking about, when we say material attachment, the bodily plane, because spiritually there isn't control in that way. And underneath that, I was seeing that actually Kamsa probably has a fear of actually being insignificant and being less and being irrelevant, practically, actually. And so he has these many fears, but he's dealing with it in this way. And the reason I wanted to make that point is that I made this point in different classes, that underneath some of the behaviors that we have, again, going back to stimulus and response, there are certain fears and certain needs that are happening. And we may not be meeting them in the right way and in a healthy way, as we can see, but they're needs that actually need to be met. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I kind of wanted the theme of the class to be talking a little bit about emotional intelligence and becoming more emotionally intelligent in Krishna consciousness, in Bhakti. So those are some thoughts there with Kamsa, and also where it's coming from when it comes to his background and when it comes to what's going on underneath him. Right? He has this envy and this deep attachment to control. And we talked about envy because this verse talks about envy. And I believe a couple months ago I gave a class on envy. And I'll make a couple points from there, and I'll also jump on make some new points as well in this regard. One of the things that came to my mind, and I actually saw this is in the 7th canto, and it's a really nice purport by Srila Prabhupada. He mentions that sometimes we think of these anarthas as impediments, and they are. But in some ways, they're actually messengers, and I made this point a couple months ago, because they're showing us some of the things that we need to work on and how we can use them actually for our own development, spiritual development and growth. Because we think of envy, we think of anger, we think of pride, and we say, well, these are not good. But it's interesting, in the 7th canto, 9th chapter, 1st verse, in the purport, this is a really nice purport, I ran across this, and Srila Prabhupada says that, actually I'll read it out loud, I think I have it here. This is really nice. He says that, and I'll read this. This is so purport. He says, Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung in his Prema Bhakti Chandrika, Krodha Bhakta Devasi Gyane. Anger should be used to punish a demon who is envious of the devotees. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya, lust, anger, greed, illusion, pride, and envy, all have their proper use for the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotee. They all have their proper use. And he goes on, he talks about this a little bit more. And the point is that actually these emotions are natural, but we can use them to understand ourselves a little bit better. And even I was coming across a letter that Srila Prabhupada had written where he talks about envy, and he mentions that actually envy is, even in the spiritual world, there's sometimes some fault and envy. And he says that sometimes the gopis will quarrel over certain things. And it's not, but he says that it's not like the material world. It's not like that, because the gopis are such advanced yogis that they understand how to use these emotions as in service, and basically in service to being the highest version of themselves and to serve Krishna, basically. And so we can look at envy in this way of also showing us what we really envy is, showing us our unrealized potential, and where we're not actually developing what we have to offer, and we're projecting it onto other people. We're projecting onto other people. And we want to really understand these anarthas before, the point is that we want to control them before they control us. So envy and anger, they're not necessarily bad from what I've now understood, but actually want to get an understanding of what they're telling us so that we can control them. And I talked a little bit about, in my previous class, a little bit about ways to deal with envy. In this case, we're speaking about Kamsa. But really, one of the biggest ways is to create a culture of appreciation, where we're appreciating each other for all the beautiful skills and talents that we all have, and doing that freely. And then using that to serve Krishna and each other, because otherwise, then envy will develop in our heart. Because someone will always be better at something than us, no matter how good we get. We can't be the best at everything. And that goes back again to playing God and to wanting to control. But really seeing that I can do many things well, but also others can do many things well as well. So really creating a culture of appreciation, and then developing ourselves or developing our service. So those are some thoughts there on envy and some of the messaging of the emotions, and how we can use these emotions actually to create impact and to actually rise above them by not repressing them or by not judging them and calling them bad, but to understand them a little bit more, and then to use them in service. Even like the gopis are, just giving an example there, they use envy to almost create a spiritual competition to serve Krishna, right? And this is a healthy expression of it. It's a healthy expression versus using it and trying to destroy other people, as we see Kamsa doing, or become destructive. And it can become destructive in low grade, where we're criticizing people, we're comparing, we're complaining in our mind, the 3 C's. We're criticizing, complaining, comparing. Or it can be outward, where we're actually trying to destroy people and to sabotage them and other things of that nature in what they're doing. And we see this sometimes even in our communities, where there can be that sense of almost not wanting others to succeed because we're afraid what it means for us. Our insecurity comes up. So those are some thoughts. And one of the last 2 points I wanted to make, one is around sangha. So we can do the work where we're creating space between stimulus and response, getting more aware of our emotions, what's going on underneath that, using them to serve, as mentioned. But if you look at Kamsa, his sangha is not great as well. Not only was he a demon in his past life, but he's not really changing things. So we look at his asuras that he's sending are all his minions and his confidants that he sends to kill Krishna. And each of them represents an anartha. And then also we look at Jarasandha, who is one of his son-in-law, Kamsa's Jarasandha's son-in-law. And that relationship is not so valuable in terms of actually cultivating Krishna consciousness and a positive relationship. And so our sangha is also really important, and this is a essential point. And I wanted to make a couple points on this, even though it's a little not super related, but it's very related in a lot of ways. There's a nice quote that I saw that we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. It's by a leadership coach named Jim Rohn. He says we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So we need to think about who are the people they're spending time with. What are some of the behaviors and the qualities they have, because inevitably they'll rub off on us in one way or another. This is really a key point here. And in the third canto, sometimes, and this point is key as well, sometimes we think that we need to be friends with everyone. We need to be friends with everyone, but we're actually, it's very difficult to be friends with everyone. And even in the devotee sangha, and even in our spiritual community, sometimes we want to be friends with everyone, but we actually can't. We're not meant to be close to everyone. We want to be well-wishers of everyone. But there's one point that I heard this in a class given by a senior devotee, which I really liked. In the third canto, Srila Prabhupada mentions that even among devotees, one should find someone of mutual understanding, basically. And he says the word swajati. It means like-mindedness, practically, of the same mind. And he says this point, and I can bring up the purport. It's a really nice, just a brief there. He says that this is in the third canto, 29th chapter, 17th verse. And he says that friendship should be cemented between persons with mutual interest and understanding. Such persons are said to be swajati, of the same caste. The devotee should avoid a person whose character is not fixed in the standard understanding, even though he may be a Vaishnava or a devotee of Krishna. If his character is not correctly representative, then he should be avoided. One should steadily control the senses and the mind and strictly follow the rules and regulations, and he should make friendship with persons of the same standard. So this is an important note when it comes to sangha. We want to find people that are like-minded in our spiritual ideals and the qualities that we want to develop. Really. Just looking at how much time we have. And yes, I wanted to end off actually when it comes to sangha with a couple points of qualities of true friends as well, because when we think of Kamsa, he's not really a true friend. When we look at Duryodhana, he's not really a true friend. Actually, they're on that level of motivation when it comes to fear and desire. And so they're just looking at what comes for them. What's their self-agenda, what's in it for them. And if there's something positive that's in it for them, they're involved. But if it isn't, they're not frankly so interested. And so how do we differentiate between even quality sangha and what's not quality sangha? Well, I had a couple thoughts. One was, I noted down 6 qualities in brief. I'll just speak about them. All these can be spoken about at greater length, but I'm just going to keep it really tight and short. One is encouragement. So true friends are happy for our success. This is an essential quality. And sometimes we can feel envious, actually, of our friends too, and this is natural. This is very natural. But a true friend will also strive to rise above that envy and jealousy and be happy. And a true Vaishnava is happy for others in their success. Parasukha sukhi and paradukha dukhi. This is the key. They're encouraging. The other one is they're honest as needed. A true friend is a well-wisher, so even sometimes they have to maybe say something that's strong. They do so with love and kindness, but they also say the thing that needs to be said to help the other individual grow. So they're honest. Third is vulnerability. And this is one part of the 6 loving exchanges, sharing your heart confidentially and hearing. And this is really important in our sangha, sharing in a vulnerable way with others that we feel comfortable with sharing, feeling safe with, and hearing them also. And all this needs to be done without judgment. This is really key as well. Without judgment, really creating a safe space for each other to share. And can be rare to find, honestly speaking, but even if we can find it with 1 or 2, 3 people, it can be very valuable. And the more the merrier, but it is something that can be rare to find. Then we also look at a couple other qualities. Integrity. This is key. Speaking truthfully and speaking about us and speaking similarly about other people when they're there and when they're not there. How are we acting when other people are not around? It's something to look at. And all these we can all work on and get better at. We may not be living these in full. And when I speak these, I'm not saying that I'm living these in full, but these are ideals we want to achieve and to work toward. Then we look at humility as well. They can apologize. Right? One of the qualities of humility is being able to also apologize when you're wrong, when you've hurt someone. And this is a true friend. Not that we get stuck in our ego and we just want to always have people see our way. Obviously that we want people to see our way, but we also want to be open to apologizing when we have to, when we need to. And acceptance, last quality, accepting others for who they are. Accepting others for who they are in this regard. And we can see Krishna actually exemplifies all these qualities. When we look at different pastimes, even in the Mahabharata, he exemplifies these for the Pandavas, actually. Very much so. And I think that what we're really speaking about here is also growing as Vaishnavas. We want to not just focus, I make this point often, but we don't want to just focus on our sadhana and on our study. In addition to that, we want to focus on our sadachar and our behavior and our interactions with ourselves and with each other. This is really important because even speaking about the qualities of a true friend, lately I've even been seeing, and I'm just speaking out loud here, sometimes there can be so many divisions even among the community. And now you even look at politically and with COVID, everyone has so many different thoughts and perspectives and whatnot, and people are quite, let's just say, vigorous with how they share it, and maybe very enthusiastic with how they share it. But also can be disrespectful, and can be aggressive, and can be hurtful, actually. And so we need to be mindful of how we deal with these emotions, becoming more emotionally intelligent. And we look at Kamsa, and I'll just end with this point, and we can open up for thoughts and questions, but he has a situation that comes to him where he's given a certain prophecy around his death, and it triggers a lot of anger and fear in him. But because he's not able to actually deal with it in a healthy way, he takes it out on Vasudeva and Devaki, who are innocent and who are family to him, right? And we call this violent communication. This is very violent. But think about if Kamsa had more awareness, actually, what he could potentially do. He could take this situation of him feeling threatened and maybe deal with it in a very different way, actually. And obviously we know that's not the case per the pastime, but we can see, at least in our life, maybe qualities that we have or areas that we have sometimes, that we are thinking like Kamsa, we're thinking like Duryodhana sometimes, actually. And just because we're chanting around doesn't mean that we're impervious to actually feeling these things. And actually we need to be even more careful about not feeling, about really being mindful of our interaction with the other Vaishnavas and other communities as well, and other individuals, even outside of our circle. We need to be very sensitive as much as possible. And none of us are perfect, and we're not aiming for that, but we're aiming for progress, not perfection. Continuing to be better and to be more mature as spiritual practitioners in the path of Bhakti, actually. And we can see the example of Vasudeva as well versus Kamsa. Kamsa's life is being threatened, and Vasudeva's life is being threatened by Kamsa and Devaki. But we can see how, in these verses, how Vasudeva is communicating with such composure, actually. And this is also a hallmark of a mature spiritualist and a yogi, that they're able to communicate even in tough situations. They're able to take stock, to reset, and communicate with composure and with calmness, even if it's a difficult discussion to have. And you can see Vasudeva doing that, and he's communicating in a very non-violent way to Kamsa. And that's something that we can aim for. It's a standard that we can aim for, that, hopefully our life is not being threatened, but in this case, his life is, and he's still able to communicate in that way. And going back to the point of our own effort actually impacting our karma or our destiny that we think, you can see that Vasudeva as a Vaishnava, he's actually cultivated these qualities, so that when he's confronted with the situation, it's not that he's making up some new qualities on the spot, or he's actually bridged that gap between stimulus and response in a healthy way, where he's created that growth for himself. And this is a standard that we can set ourselves to. How can we improve and really take actual stock of the ways we have to grow, and even some of the feedback that we're getting, whether it's from Krishna, whether it's from the devotees, whether it's from our communities, and use that to become better Vaishnavas. Not just we come to temple socially, culturally. Yes, that's there. Kirtans are amazing. Of course, that's there. Prasadam is amazing. Of course, that's there. The community is amazing. Of course. But how are we actually growing in a way that is helping us move forward and getting closer to Krishna, and not further away? Because when we're on the spiritual path, we're actually held to a higher standard. Actually, we hold ourselves to a higher standard, but we actually can affect other people's spiritual life as well, and we can affect it positively or affect it negatively. And so we need to be really mindful of that as much as possible. And I'm saying this for myself just as much as everyone else in this room. So I wanted to share that in short. I talked about a couple points. We talked about Vasudev and Kamsa and the dialogue between them. We talked about Bhakti Vinod Thakur, the 4 motivations, which are there: fear, desire, duty, and love. And we talked about how we're talking about fear and desire in this case, and we talked about duty and love as well, and being the higher motivations. We talked about the principle of karma and applying it more toward actually our effort and our control and what we have and what we can do, instead of expecting or hoping and praying for some divine entity to save us. We can actually work on ourselves by ourselves and take control of that stimulus and response, and creating freedom in that growth. And we talked a little bit about the mind and how it can be more negative sometimes than positive unless we train it. And we talked about Kamsa and how he's a personification of material attachment, envy, control, power, and how underneath that there's some vulnerability, and how we can use that vulnerability within all of us to actually use these emotions as messengers to actually serve and to grow spiritually, as mentioned. And we also talked lastly about the importance of sangha, having like-minded sangha, signs of a true friendship, green flags of a true friendship, and how we can communicate non-violently, and how we can communicate with maturity amongst our community and all of us. So I wanted to end there, and I know that was a lot in just one little bit. And I never know how to approach these. It's not long enough where I can throw in a lot, but I still somehow do. So I appreciate you all following along, and I hope it wasn't too much. I'll open up to any questions or any concerns or thoughts. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Anuj, Sharma Prabhu. I just wanted to quickly reflect back that I really enjoyed where you were talking about habit. And there was actually the speaker on Friday, Godruma Pranadas Prabhu. He spoke about how desires lead to actions and actions lead to habits, which then build our character. And I felt like that was so in line with what you were talking about, in the sense of empowering ourselves to see that and see that progression, and understand that we have that, just as you were talking about, that space in between impulse and reaction. We also have that space in between the desire and the actions and the habits, to kind of stop that and see if that's something that we want to build our character or not. So I really thought that was powerful. And then my question was, where does gratitude come in to help with this negative bias that you were talking about, and also about this progression of building ourselves? I was just wondering if you could speak to that at all.
Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you for your engagement every class. I would see you on here. Thank you. Yeah, to your point, absolutely, and that's what I mean when we speak about habits become second nature. But before, like I think Srila Prabhupada, I saw in one purport, he said the best time to he said that no one is born smoking and drinking, but we learn these behaviors basically and through society, and then it becomes second nature, right? And we can apply that to not just that, but to other things, other habits that we've created. And so to your point, that's exactly right, that we create these habits and then eventually they become second nature. So the best time to actually nip them is to actually don't start them, or to get really conscious as soon as possible about some of those things. In terms of gratitude, your question, I think that's very key, and I think that's actually the foundation When we talk about even creating a culture of appreciation in dealing with envy, gratitude is key there too, because we can always see the glass half empty or half full. And either is a perspective, but actually being able to see the glass half full is actually a very positive and perspective that's rare in some cases, because often the mind wants to go to all the negative that's going on. Even in our lives, we see with the pandemic, sometimes I have to remind myself where sometimes it feels like things have changed and things aren't going back yet and things are slow and it's been 2 years. But then I have to sometimes sit back and remind myself that, okay, but we're also been gifted so many things during this time. And we're also so lucky to have the things that we have. And to your point, it is very essential to have that healthy sense of gratitude that we have. It's very key. And also at the same time, we want to have gratitude and also a certain sense of not dissatisfaction, but sense of motivation to grow as well, to continue to grow. Both are important, but that sense of gratitude is really helpful, because when we have that, then we can actually stay in a positive state to actually change. If we don't have that, we can get overwhelmed with negativity, and then we're not really able to change and grow. Thank you for that question.
Haribol, brother. Hare Krishna.
Vivo, thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful class. I'm still new to Krishna consciousness. But one thing, reflecting on what you said, was reminding me of something I read in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, where Solomon was asked the meaning of life. And he summed it up in like 2 sentences. He said, fear God and keep all his commandments. And then when Jesus was asked, of all the commandments, which commandments should we hold close to us? And Jesus said, to love thy God. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Anyway, love.
Thank you. Nice point. Yes.
Love.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Will. And
commandments. So thank you.
there's we'll talk about the 4 motivations: fear, desire, duty, and love being the highest. Absolutely, and that's what we're aiming for.
Just
Anuj,
oh,
go ahead, Radhika. Radhika, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, just a reflection that I was having as you were giving class. Thank you so much for class, Prabhu. I was thinking that, you had mentioned the Mahabharata, and something also I find so interesting, and it's a lesson for us, is that, Dhritarashtra, yes, he was this character, this person who was unwilling to grow. But, you mentioned sangha. He had the best sangha, surrounded by Bhishma and Vidura, Bhishma a Mahajan. And those 2 people had all the 6 qualities you mentioned of excellent sangha. Yet his spiritual life or his own progress was his own responsibility, because he was unwilling to take their advice at any moment and give himself the space to grow. So I was just having that reflection and thought, like, how interesting that can be our situation as well, where we can have amazing sangha, but if we're unwilling to grow, then the onus is definitely on us.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Radhika. That's a good point. And that's where we're speaking to this point around, it's really on us at the end of the day. It's very freeing, but also scary to have that thought at the end of the day, that we can have all the circumstances, positive or negative, but if we don't take it upon ourselves, then it's really at the end of the day, our situation and our future, it depends on what we're doing today and how we're moving forward. That's a nice point.
We follow up on what's being discussed in relation to it's on us, that point. Sometimes it may seem as though we're weak and overwhelmed by the mind. And then my question is, it's on us, it's our responsibility, it's our spiritual growth. But what is the role of Krishna, the Guru, the Scripture? Is it just us, or maybe there's also Krishna who can make big things? It's Scripture and the devotees. What is their role? What's the correlation between our responsibility for our spiritual growth, and the resources that we have, including Krishna, Guru, and the devotees.
It's a nice point, Prabhu, in question. So that is essential. When we say it's on us, what I mean that our effort's on us. We cannot control the outcome always, but the best example in this is Mother Yashoda and Krishna. In the Damodar Leela, we speak about it. But there's two sides of the coin. There's effort and there's mercy. Mother Yashoda wanted to bind Krishna, and each time she was doing that, many of you probably are familiar with this pastime, she was 2 fingers too short with the rope. But she was trying so earnestly in this case. And Krishna saw that. She would go get more rope. She would bring it back, tie Krishna. And so we're not always going to succeed. And when I say it's on us, I don't mean that it's on us and all the results are on us in terms of the nuances of everything. What I mean to say is that we don't want to. Actually the best quote in this regard also is that, I think I've heard this many places, that we want to pray as though everything depends on God, but act as everything depends on us. So pray as though everything depends on Krishna, but act as if everything is really depending on us. And that's actually the best way to meet this equation of effort and mercy. And going back to Mother Yashoda, she was putting this effort in and she was 2 fingers too short. Krishna saw this, and eventually his mercy came out and he closed the gap between those 2 fingers. And so at the end of the day, Radha Muralidhar, our results depend on them. And they can throw curveballs. Even we look in these pastimes and these demons are acting in such like abominable ways, and then they get mukti at the end of the day, you know? And so it kind of is bewildering, but actually Krishna can come at any moment and change everything up. Krishna is the ultimate game changer. And so it's really up to them, but we should also not rely just on that, right? We want to actually putting in the effort, and Krishna loves to see that effort, actually. He loves to see that sincere. Srila Prabhupada uses this so many times, a sincere practitioner. He uses the word sincere a lot, because when we have that sincerity, it's a very captivating quality for Krishna as well to see. Both are important. And then you mentioned Guru. That's also very important, because we need gurus, and there can be so many different types of gurus, whether it's Diksha Guru, but then there's also Shiksha Gurus and mentors and examples and leaders in the community. Anuj Bihari Prabhu and I just were speaking about, before we got on here, about a leader that he was inspired by, that we both were touched by. And so that's highly important, because they're modeling behavior for us, and they're also teaching us so many different things from their wisdom. So that is also a guidepost as well. We need both. We need both. We need Guru and Krishna, Gurus and Krishna. So both are there.
Nice. So it's not just me. It's Guru, Krishna, Anuj, Sharma Prabhu. It's our morning Bhagavatam sangha. I also, you also touched upon a subject of division among the devotees in our community. And I just wanted to tell a quick anecdote in that regard. When this division first became apparent in 2016, when we had this election, I don't want to name any politicians here, but everybody was kind of taking sides, and devotees also were trying to identify themselves on either side. And I asked one devotee that I admire and I look up to, I asked him very bluntly, who are you voting for? This candidate or that, him or her? That was my question. And he looked at me with compassion and he said, I vote for Srila Prabhupada. I vote every day. I vote for Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
And just a quick anecdote in that regard. I'm not sure if you have anything to share more than beyond what you said, because you covered this subject perfectly. But that was just my quick thought.
Thank you, Boo. I wouldn't add so much more. I don't think it's worth getting into the details of everything, because everyone has their own preferences and opinions. And then it takes away from the spirit of what's focusing on Srimad Bhagavatam anyway. But I would say that, to your point, at the end of the day, we want to, how can we stay together as a community and communities? I don't mean, when I say community, I don't mean Bhakti Center, but I mean our greater spiritual community. and I also mean the world community. We have different co-centric communities within each other, and we're all part of the same community. We're all on this planet at this time. So we have an obligation and a duty, but then also from a sense of love to really love each other, and to take care of each other. I think that that's so important. And how do we deal with our differences with maturity? I think that was the key there, as much as possible. Sometimes there is being frustrated. Sometimes I know I can feel frustrated as well, and a little hopeless sometimes of different things or how things are handled and etc. But how do we keep that in a positive spirit? How do we deal with each other with sensitivity is key. Even if someone has a strong opinion this way or that way, as much as possible, we should try to be inclusive and mindful and sensitive as much as can be. And sometimes it's important to distance. Sometimes it's important to turn off social media, whatever the case might be. I think it's actually very healthy to do that. Turn off the news, all that stuff. But those are my thoughts on that, without getting into details. And I think that everyone needs to make, obviously there's genuine issues whenever we're living in the material world. There's genuine issues that we all have to deal with and have to process and have different perspectives on when we're dealing with them.
Nice, thank you. Bhima Prabhu, who are you voting for?
Okay, and we had
Why
Andrea,
do you
is
Haribo, go ahead, go to Andrea. Don't mess with me.
is there a question? there?
Don't tread on me. That's all I can say. Don't tread on me. I got Krishna.
Good.
I'll take you down. Haribo.
Rivo.
I just wanted to share that I'm actually doing the ISKCON communications course, which was put together by Anuttama Das Prabhu, and it talks about the reflective listening and how to listen to each other in ways that we are keeping in mind the needs, interests, and concerns of others. And it's I'm not being paid to promote it, but I really encourage devotees to take this course, because at first I didn't take it a year ago because I thought it was only for leaders, and I thought it was only for people who would be talking to government officials or temple presidents, like people who are doing more important stuff in my head. And now that I'm taking the course, I realize that we're all kind of people who are promoting ISKCON and promoting Krishna consciousness in our lives. And if we don't have these skills of how to, as you were saying, Anuj, Sharma Prabhu, how to listen to people who are different opinions than us and be able to be respectful and to be able to reflect back to them and understand what are their needs, interests, and concerns, and where do we come together with the similarities, then we each have that role. And I definitely recommend taking this course because it really gives you an idea of how we could be the gentlemen and the ladies that Srila Prabhupada wanted all ISKCON members to be, so that we are going out into the world, and it's not about converting everyone, it's about creating sympathizers to Krishna, right? And about having others be sympathetic to Krishna. And if eventually they turn into Krishna devotees, that's great. But Prabhupada would go out and he would just like the story that somebody told recently about how Prabhupada, there was like the devotees, they had an older lady that was near the temple, and everybody was like mad. She was mad because they were making so much noise. And Prabhupada showed up, and all he did was talk to her like two old people. He wasn't trying to convert her. He was just trying to create a sympathizer. So I guess that's my long-winded way of promoting the ISKCON communications course, and also promoting that we can do this. We're each capable of creating that.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I think that these type of courses and these type of trainings and discussions and conversations are so important for our community, actually. And I think that we need to have more of them, because I think that just focusing, obviously we want to chant, we want to be doing our services, etc. But I think that we also need to be growing in that way, in some of these skills, because otherwise then we're vulnerable to many different things, actually, especially infighting and just lack of sensitivity. And actually, I made this point, I think, in my last class, and I know we should probably wrap up soon, but sometimes we have these beautiful ideals in bhakti, but if we're not practicing them in our behavior, actually, then people can actually feel turned off by the actual practice, right? Because we have these ideals, and so it's so important that we're actually practicing them as much as possible. We're all human, we're all imperfect, but it's really important that we practice them deeply so that our communities can be thriving, and people feel seen and heard and understood and cared for. And I think that will be just really powerful, because just coming in and expecting people to just chant and be happy, yes, that's there, but there's a lot that goes behind chanting and being happy. And it comes, communication skills are there, like you mentioned. How are we applying some of this wisdom to our actual behavior and our developing qualities that will actually substantiate the wisdom that we're talking about? Otherwise, we can actually come across as hypocrites, quite frankly, and that can be even more affecting to ourselves and to others, because the expectation is higher sometimes. And so we need to be very mindful that I'm speaking bluntly and plainly, but I've seen that over many years, having grown up in the movement. A lot of positives, but also sometimes the areas that we all need to work on, and some of the negative points, you could say, or areas of improvement.
Okay, we can take one more. Would anyone else like to share anything? Maybe reflect? There's a lot of appreciation in the chat.
Yes, thank you all for that. I see that. Thank you, Henry, Preeti, Derek, Jumanajaya. Thank you so much. Isabel, I'm so glad that it was helpful, what you needed to hear. Karthik, thank you. Dina, thank you. I don't know if everyone's on still, but I just want to appreciate everyone as well for their engagement and for listening and coming on.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu, for a beautiful, well-prepared class. Very practical. Many takeaways from myself personally. Thank you very much. We look forward to spending time with you again next month. Thank you very much. And
Okay.
thanks,
Hey,
everyone.
Haribol,
What's that? Will?
Haribol, Anand Vihari. This is
Oh,
Bhima.
Bhima Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I come in right in just like Will. I burst on the scene. Very quick question. Are we starting at 7 a.m.? Are we gonna go back retro a little bit to 7 instead of 7:15 in order to give more time for the speaker and discussion?
Yeah, we're going to
do
7 starting March 1st. We're
March 1st. Great. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Great. I hate it when it ends.
Hare Krishna, Bhima Prabhu. Bhima Prabhu is creating horse sympathizers.
Yeah, that's damn straight. Kalki is going to need some side riders, behind him when he comes in to loop off all the heads of the people I didn't vote for. So that's why these horses are in training. Okay, so I can ride with Kalki and take the demons down. Hare Krishna.
Nice.
Okay, Haribol. Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.